Hi, this is Mark Evanier. I wrote for Scooby-Doo on the comic books and on the TV show, and you're listening to a podcast named Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
The gang's all here, they're on the case, and there's no ghost that they wouldn't face, 'cause they dig it, Scooby-Doo. Yeah, they dig it, Scooby-Doo.
Hey gang, and welcome to another episode of a podcast named Scooby-Doo, the show that attempts to unravel 50 years of mysteries, meddling kids, and masked villains. My name is Mike Josick, and I'll be your guide through all things ghostly and groovy as I investigate every angle of every mystery and beyond. So grab yourself some Scooby snacks, fire up the mystery machine, and let's start the show.
At approximately 1400 hours, state and federal authorities uncovered a duffel bag in the woods. Said bag contains 24 hours of Scooby-Doo episodes.
Excuse me, what episodes? The Spacey Space Kook? Which is
Yes,
which?
all of them.
Will you be releasing them to the public?
We'll be showing them in a marathon type situation.
What about the whereabouts of the kids? Where are the
I
kids?
can't discuss that at this time. You'll just have to watch the
Have you talked to
marathon.
families?
No more questions.
Hey, excuse me, over here. Where are the kids? The public has a right
Were
to
there
know.
animals in the van?
So here we are with episode 31 of the podcast. At the risk of dating this show for future listeners, I hope everyone is staying safe. I hope everyone is keeping your hands clean and not touching your face. That's very important. I don't know if that's something Scooby and Shaggy could do. I think that would be quite a challenge for them, but try and live your best pandemic life. I know I'm trying to do that right now. A lot of people are in isolation, a lot of stuff going on in the world. Take care of yourselves and listen to podcasts. That's what we're here for. I'm just going to qualify for anybody who hasn't listened to part one and refuses to listen to part one because they just marched to their own drummer. This is a conversation that I had with Casper Kelly and Larry Morris, the second part of which they were two of the creators that put together the Scooby-Doo Project, which was a series of interstitials, bumpers between Scooby-Doo Marathon that played on Cartoon Network back in 1999. And it was assembled into an 18-minute director's cut, which is kind of their approved cut. I know there's more minutes out there. There are people who have assembled it online and put it together. It's cool to have all of it out there, but this is sort of the piece as they wanted it to flow. Larry's posted it on his Vimeo page. There's links to that in the show notes. And we just talk about working at Cartoon Network, putting the thing together, mixing live action and animation, working with the voice cast, doing the crazy things that they did to cobble this together, and the fact that it's still being talked about 20 years later. It's still being watched. People are still clicking on this thing. They're still seeking it out online. It's craziness. Makes sense though, because it's actually really, really good. It is the best Blair Witch Project parody you will ever find. I find that it so perfectly blends these characters with a cultural moment, and it doesn't betray the fundamentals of those characters. This is still 110% Scooby-Doo. These guys knew what they were doing, and it is actually the Blair Witch Project creators' favorite parody that exists out there. And there were a lot. There was hella lots. So that's pretty cool too. Thanks so much for coming back for part two. I've got nothing else really to say, so I'm going to cut it there, and I will see you on the other side.
Guys, I think I found something.
What is it, Freddy? It looks like an abandoned drive-in. What would a drive-in be doing all the way out here?
Like I don't know, and I don't care. Just lead us to that snack bar. Yeah, snack bar.
So I'm going to have some of my facts on this wrong, but I do know that the Scooby-Doo Project was probably the first time that Burger King bought airtime on Cartoon Network in Prime because they saw that we were doing something that was culturally relevant. So
That's cool.
Yeah. So a couple of ad sales guys got some big checks that year because we were, busting our butts.
So I'm assuming this, Burger King already had a relationship because they had a promotion.
Yes.
where Scott made his debut as Shaggy. Yeah. So I said I want to talk about the animation a bit. I remember when I first saw it. I think I first saw the 11-minute version, and I was just like, "What the hell is this?" And I'm looking at the animation, and I think I'd already seen some of the Adult Swim stuff like C-Lab and Harvey Birdman. I think I assumed that a lot of it was just repurposed animation, but of course, it's all original, correct?
Yes. Yeah. It was like we said before about not being able to have a lot of motion. Anything that was reused or rotoscoped from our old library tapes we couldn't use, because basically we would have to composite and make them move through some of the footage, which was impossible. So everything was animated to what we shot.
But I do think we were judicious about reusing. Maybe we didn't. Like, once they drew a medium shot of Daphne, we were able to use that a few times, right? Like, we
here and there, yes. Like if her back is to us, to you, and she's talking, we would,
Oh yes, I remember that. Because what we would call the mouth movement is lip flap.
Yeah.
And I think we had back flap, which was the back of someone and you saw their jaw moving. And we're like, we can put her in the foreground blurry and do some back flap there.
Yeah. But Velma really drives the whole thing, and she's barely on camera.
Because she's holding
the camera. So we really relied on her to kind of tell the story, and so the animation was heavily thought about in the edit. So as we're cutting this thing, we would send cuts to the animation company, and we'd probably have to trim things here or there to make it work. But they actually animated over our edits to time. I do remember that.
And how long did that whole process take?
So they started animating probably in mid to late August, probably, hypothetically, and that thing turned in at least mid-October to late October. So that's a very short run. It's probably only, well, I was going to say, it's probably only about 8 to 10 minutes or less, probably like 5 or 6 minutes of animation, I would think. It's not that much animation.
I guess it's not.
Yeah.
Really
a lot of it's their POV,
Yeah.
But it's paced out, so it works.
You mentioned some backshots. There were a few backshots, and I remember thinking at the time, because you're so used to like the side scrolling of Hanna-Barbera stuff, and seeing profile or quarter turn, whatever it is. Seeing the backs was kind of surprising for me, and I wasn't sure at the time if it was a creative choice because this is something we haven't seen before, or if it was a sort of creative technical choice where obviously if you don't see the lip flap, you could put any kind of dialogue in there.
It's actually two things. Yes, the dialogue coverage, absolutely. Obviously, the nature of Blair Witch being what it was, that's a condition of it as well. But at the time, and this is probably a whole other conversation. At the time, Cartoon was doing a lot of live action content, little interstitial shorts, with live action people interacting with 2D animation, and so we were actually. And I love like Pete's Dragon and again the Fleischer rotoscoped cartoons with Popeye going through 3-dimensional models. So there was a lot of discussion I remember at the time about shadows and 2D versus 3D and like how do you all the Cartoon Network interstitials were flat. There were 2D characters in these 3D spaces, and so we were already attuned to shoot and make things in that kind of space. So having that play out in the Scooby-Doo Project the way it did was even just icing on the cake. I still remember having conversations with international Cartoon Network groups about how to treat characters in 2D that are 2D in 3D spaces. Not because of Scooby-Doo Project, just because of the kind of the mantra, the animation style that Cartoon Network on air was doing.
In the Blair Witch, the interviews with the people were kind of improv, and I was wondering, I know you guys said that you spent a lot of time hashing out the script on this thing. Were those all, like the live action interviews with the townspeople and whatnot, was any of that improv, or was that all totally scripted?
I think it was, or it would be like we have the idea we want you to get across, but you can kind of say it in your own words, I think. Isn't that about how we did it?
Yeah, it was definitely...
Because they didn't memorize stuff, did they?
We only cast one person, that was the woman with the bad teeth, But yeah, we basically one of the guys was my friend's dad.
One of them was my mom.
Yep.
By the mailbox. That's my mom.
Yep. and
my dad didn't want to do it. I wanted to get him to, but he was too shy.
And I don't have the footage of the other folks, but I do have footage of you directing your mom.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, it was me. I basically played the Velma part. So I would walk up with the camera and say, "Hey, we hear that there's these woods are haunted. What do you think?" And her natural, acting abilities would just come out. She would just make something up. So yeah, it was very improv-y.
So does your mom know how often her performance has been viewed?
I don't know if she does. I'm gonna have to. I'll have to tell her about this in this podcast as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'll have to get that footage.
Yeah.
I think we talked about this a little bit off air. I wanted to bring up the Super Bowl coda,
Yes.
where I'm not sure what year that happened in, which Super Bowl that was, but we revisit Fred, who is talking to Moltar, and Moltar's asking him about getting out of the woods alive, because everybody thought that they didn't make it. You said that Steve was the creative force behind that one?
That particular stunt was done by Steve Patrick and Craig Sven Gordon, right?
I believe so.
So those two guys.
That probably was 2000. He wouldn't have waited until 2001 to do that. So I'm pretty sure that would be a few months later in 2000.
I suppose Super Bowl is like February, right?
That's right.
Oh, so it's real close.
Yeah.
Literally like 3-4 months, yeah.
Right.
So we even had a Cartoon Network promo universe, like the MCU.
That's right. Well, I don't know if you've probably seen them, but we kind of mirrored ESPN in the States. ESPN had a campaign, and still does, where athletes are in the offices of ESPN. And so that's kind of what we created at Cartoon. There was several different kind of ad branding interstitials, but the one that was very popular and was fun to work on was having the cartoon characters actually work at Cartoon Network. And so we had this kind of universe that we created, in the actual office spaces. Everyone's cube and office was used at least once for a shoot.
That was actually one of the things that I really enjoyed about those bumpers or interstitials that ran, because it was kind of taking the Hanna-Barbera stuff and giving it like the Roger Rabbit kind of treatment, where
yes,
all these shows are just like things that they've acted in and whatnot, and they actually kind of exist.
Yeah.
There was the Scrappy one where he was trying to get in and like nobody was letting him in, and
yeah. It got bigger and more elaborate as it went on too, and it did morph into what became Cartoon Fridays. So the whole idea that there was a stage and a studio inside the building somewhere, and that's because we couldn't host from the floor. It was kind of boring. It didn't look like a TV show. So, and obviously Steve and everyone, everyone's big fans of Larry Sanders and things like that, where the fourth wall kind of comes down. So that's what it turned into. It turned into, because Chris and I worked on Cartoon Fridays as well. So it turned into that big open for Cartoon Fridays, where it takes you through the offices, from space down to Cartoon Network Studios and through.
Yeah. And like Mojo Jojo and would be a host, and
yep.
With Ed and Eddie or something, we
That's
do
right.
weird combinations. And yeah, that's a whole other conversation about all those interstitials. Like Larry did that one with the Legion of Doom.
Yep, Legion of Pants.
With Solomon Grundy. I just want a decent pair of pants.
Yeah. Now here's the thing about that. Well, we're getting way off topic here, of course, but Casper Kelly was the first person at Cartoon Network before What's Up, Super Friends, this is before everything, before Birdman, before Legion of Pants. You did Birdman Coffee Break.
That's right.
And I started at Cartoon Network, and he did an interstitial with Birdman just wanting coffee and trying to make the perfect cup of coffee without blowing up the world, because the Doomsday button is next to the coffee button, and Avenger is making the coffee for him. And so seeing that thing so, rudimentary, and, you struggled for months to put that thing together. And I remember him having a hard time selling it through. But once he did that, the floodgates were open, because then we started creating a lot of the superhero, and the Scooby-Doo Project, and all the things that were, having fun and poking fun at the characters, but not making fun of.
Yeah, that was such a fine line with all of those shows. I'm the kind of person who, I don't get like too swept up in the nostalgia of something. I like to see things evolve. I like to see things grow. but I also there is that essence that you can kind of betray, particularly with like a long-running franchise where you have an agenda or you have a joke or you have something that you're trying to push, and this is just the thing that you're using to do it. It doesn't feel true to the character, and it lacks authenticity when you do that. And I mentioned this with the gang breaking down in the forest, and with like all of those interstitials, being able to watch Harvey Birdman and love that, it was all because there was something at the core of all of those ideas that was so true to who those characters were, and it was making fun of the tropes, and it was definitely saying like, look how silly and ridiculous this thing is, but also recognizing kind of the power of the iconography and the history and the nostalgia, I guess. You're not...
Yeah. There weren't many characters, Scrappy definitely was a character that, is a love him or hate him character. You've discussed it on your podcast. It's when you have to write for him and when you have to work with him, you're kind of like, oh, okay, I gotta figure this guy out, And there weren't many characters in the catalog that people disliked.
As a kid, I loved Jabberjaw.
Oh yeah.
And then it was cool because there was all those ones that only lasted a season that I half remembered, like Funky Phantom.
Yeah.
And it was cool to be able to, we had a library so we could just borrow the episodes and to kind of reacquaint yourself, or Inch High Private Eye.
Well, yeah, when your ghost talking about getting a start on Goober and the Ghost. I was just like, wow, Goober and the Ghost. Remember that thing? Or like the Gary Coleman show. Having to work on the Gary Coleman show promos.
And we would air those. Yeah, we would air those and have to do promos for them, or like the Pac-Man show.
The Pac-Man show.
Or the Sporks.
Because Hanna-Barbera was basically producing programming for all three networks, and they were competing with themselves. If one of the shows wasn't working, it was playing opposite another one of their shows, and they would just like rotate things out and be like, well, what's the next idea to put in? They never really had to like compete with something creatively for ratings in a way. Yeah. So you got so many of those, Goober and the Ghost Chasers and Jabberjaw and
Captain Caveman,
all of that stuff.
Loved Captain Caveman.
Yes,
it was a Scooby clone. It was just how can we take the Scooby formula and I don't know, let's put a caveman in there. Kind of talks like Scooby,
who pulls a bunch of shit out of his fur.
I used to love Captain Caveman when I was a kid.
Bongo.
Larry, you mentioned that you've listened to the podcast and you've heard some of the Scrappy discussions that have been had. You probably know that I am not a Scrappy hater.
Yes.
I'm actually really curious because most of the people that I talk to who have worked with Scrappy don't actually hate the character, and some have actually tried to bring the character back in some form and kind of take back the scrap, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, take back the scrap. Yeah.
Lack of better phrasing. So I was wondering, because you said that you had done some Scrappy pieces for the Scooby-Doo Project. What's your take on Scrappy?
Well, I'm not a terrier guy. I'm more of a Labrador kind of guy. I think at that time it was I was the new, basically I was the new guy at Cartoon Network. I was the youngest member of the team. So basically I got a lot of those bad promos to make, and so I had to work with all that. It wasn't that I didn't like the character as much as I didn't like the shows. I didn't really, and no disrespect to the any listeners who worked on those things or liked those Scooby iterations, but those were tough to promote or to find something new about. And so when it came to the Scooby-Doo Project, I actually relished in the fact that I could actually use him and use him in a way that was scary, and then the reveal is, it's just Scrappy-Doo. I know. And then in the long version or in the version that hit air, they just kind of hang back and let him walk off, and they just they just leave him. They kind of ditch him, right? So again, it was a little cruel, but again, I don't hate him. He's kind of annoying to me, And
I guess that's by design, right?
It's by design.
Yeah,
he's scrappy. Yeah, he's scrappy. He's got a big ego for a little guy, So, but yeah, I do like other iterations of him that I've seen, in the movies and in different, shows. But I was writing for that very first version. Was it 78 through 81? Whenever that was, he premiered, he debuted. That's who I was really writing for.
I think like a character like Jabberjaw or Funky Phantom, in the wrong hands, yeah, they can be boring and they can be terrible, but if you have somebody who's actually like, what can I do with this character that's interesting and not like purposely trying to undermine the character at the same time. I just think the Scrappy problem is I don't want to say lazy writing, but back in those like late 70s, early 80s, there was a lot of just get to the gag. Like they took all the other gang members out. It was just Scooby and Shaggy and Scrappy. So it was like if you took all the jokes out of a Scooby-Doo episode and put them into like a 7-minute pocket, like that's basically all you got, which took a lot of the interesting dynamics out of it. So I think all of their poorer qualities sort of came out in a way that maybe shouldn't have at the time. But
he's not much of a straight man, you know. Like Daphne and Fred were straight and could play off those antics that we loved as kids and fans of the series love with Scooby and Shaggy. When you added Scrappy, you had another kind of type A personality, you know, to Shaggy. And I feel like someone was like, kids love the dog, but the dog doesn't talk enough, you know. So let's get a fast talking dog in there, you know. I don't know.
What's your take on Scrappy, Casper?
I wondered if it was sort of, this is a common thing people will do, is like, kids love Batman, but they need a kid they can identify with. Let's add Robin, because he's a kid like them. And no kid wants to be Robin. No kid wants to be a kid. They want to be the cool adult. They want to be Batman. You know what I mean? Like, so I sort of wondered if Scrappy was a little of that, you know, idea of like, let's add a younger character that's more of a kid, but I don't know. So, yeah, but to me, I don't have a strong feeling about him either way, but I think at the time I wasn't really into him. I didn't get that he was hated, but I guess I didn't like him. Yeah. It kind of messed up the chemistry to me. It's like Cousin Oliver on the Brady. When you have these characters...
Well, Scooby Dumb, right? Was it Scooby Dumb?
Oh, yeah. Once the family really starts expanding.
That's when it got bad. I was like, oh.
Yeah. Mamadou and... I don't even know all their names. I've blocked it out.
I'd much rather have a Blue Falcon Dynamite team up than Scooby Dumb.
Oh, yeah, that. Blue Falcon and Dynamite.
Come on, Biff.
So, as we mentioned at the top, this Scooby-Doo project is 20 years old. It's a legacy thing. It's something that people are still really interested in. Like, how do you feel about somebody calling you up and saying, hey, come on a podcast and talk about this thing that you did a long time ago?
It feels incredible.
Yeah,
I'm sure none of you thought it was going to last this long.
Well, it is strange because there's been I don't know, there's been how many Blair Witch? There's a new Blair Witch movie evidently, right? There's something.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, it's probably straight to streaming service or something. But yeah, there's a new Blair Witch thing. There hasn't been a new Scooby-Doo thing. We should maybe go in there and pitch it. It feels great. I mean, I'm really proud of it. I still am. I mean, I just watched it again for the first time last week. I hadn't seen it in a while, and I was just laughing so hard. It's really funny. It's really, really funny, and I think it's just testament to the passion, really wanting to make a really great thing that made us laugh and made people go, oh my gosh, that's perfect. I can't believe they did, a Blair Witch parody, because there were so many Blair Witch parodies at the time, if you recall. Yeah. And I think this might be the perfect one. I was fortunate enough to meet those guys at Sundance in 2000, Dan Myrick and Ed Sanchez. I don't remember which one told me that they really, really, really loved it, but
oh wow, I didn't know that.
One of them were like, that was awesome. It was a very short conversation.
That's awesome.
It was over Mexican food and beer, but it's definitely like, yeah, that was great. That was awesome, So, I think that those guys, obviously, to have something that's so iconic parodying your movie, I mean, it's one more surreal tick in a very surreal year for them, I'm sure.
Yes. Wow, that's amazing. I've never heard that. That's great.
Yeah.
That makes me happy.
This is actually one of my favorite things about having these conversations, because I've actually had a few people tell me that in preparation for doing an interview, because they haven't talked about Scooby-Doo for like 30 years, and they start talking to some of their animation friends, and they start remembering their time at Hanna-Barbera, and they don't think they have anything to say about it, but once they start talking to each other, like all these memories start coming back, and they're like, yeah, that was really fun, just kind of going back there, and it was a fun time for them.
Did you ever get like new information or clarification on like legendary HB stories Like, because we'd always hear stories, hearsay, back in Atlanta at Cartoon Network, and we wanted to meet like Star Worth and like these names that we saw on the credits, or people who worked there, and we never really got to interact with them at the time. It was always kind of like we were back in Atlanta doing our own thing.
Yeah.
HB was kind of shutting down.
What is one of those stories?
Well, there's that legend about them. There was a rare snow day in L.A., and they took the old cells out of from the old shows, and they used them to sled down the little hill there next to Cahuenga. And
that's hilarious and horrifying.
Yeah, that was told to us a long time ago. And I always saw Star Worth's name in the credits, and I thought it was like a Xerox machine or like some sort of piece of machinery as a kid, but it turns out she was actually real and worked there for years.
I've gotten a couple of stories. Nothing. I can't think of the word that I want to say here. I talked to Mark Evanier, who has this encyclopedic knowledge of all things to do with animation and Hanna-Barbera, and like his recall is just amazing. But I'm always fishing for those stories because, like I said, Termite Terrace, right? I mean, there's those collections of really creative people who are just, I use the word churning in the most lovable way possible, churning out work. Like they're just producing and producing and producing, and they're just kind of always on, and they're there for long periods of time. And I mean, it kind of builds that esprit de corps, and craziness ensues, and there's a comfort level that's maybe unhealthy for a workplace. And
yeah, that described it.
Yeah.
That described it. It's a smaller unit than obviously than an animation studio like HB or even Cartoon Studios is now. Cartoon Studios now is huge. I mean, there's I think 4 stories and 2 different buildings. But for us back then, it was definitely that kind of thing. It was definitely close knit. Everybody knew each other's business. It seemed like we were always going out and drinking beers. It was like a small animation team almost, but we didn't actually draw.
So Scooby's 50 years old this year. I always, in the same way that I ask everyone kind of what their entry point into Scooby-Doo was, I also like to ask what everybody thinks is the staying power of the show. The franchise has kind of ebbed and flowed over the last 50 years, and it's had some really low points and it's had some really high points, and it's just one of those really culturally iconic, identifiable things, these 4 kids and their dog. Like, I have my theory, but I'm always interested to find out what people who've worked on it think of why has it lasted 50 years. Because there are people who are like really bitter that this thing has lasted as long as it has, because a lot of people see it as like really low quality, factory produced animation, right? So they're like, why is my quality show, canceled after 2 seasons, but Scooby-Doo's 50 freaking years old?
I mean, I'd say my theory is related to Seinfeld. It's also related to the main cast of characters for Star Wars. I mean, you've got the right formula. There's a formula there. You've got a nonverbal R2-D2. You've got Kramer, Shaggy. I mean, there's some analogies, right? But I think that there's a formula there that works, and then you've got the mystery on top of that. I think you got great art direction and backgrounds, and the look of the show, the original show, is as retro as it is. They were lucky that retro held up as long as it did. That it wasn't too hippie or flower power, right? It was kind of groovy, and that sort of worked, especially in the 80s still. It's just iconic because of that. The formula of each character and writing for them, I could sit down and write a Scooby script right now because it's so iconic, and it's almost easy, and so you can't really push it in too many different directions. You can put real monsters in there, but then you can't go too scary. You can't take it places, again, like we didn't take it so far in Blair Witch that it was not outside the scope of this character. So I think that it's really that concrete of the characters that holds it together, that formula. If you add Scrappy in there, you had the cousin in there, and Scooby-Dum in there. I mean, it doesn't work as well.
Yeah, I agree. There's a great chemistry in there. The voice actors, it's a great chemistry. And then I think there's something to, like, take Huckleberry Hound or something that was more of a pure comedy. This had moments that it wasn't trying to be a joke. It was just scary, or what would be scary to a child. And you get to dabble in that feeling of being scared, and then the comic relief, which just is a powerful combination. I mean, like Stranger Things, they figured out to combine the Spielberg with Scary. Spielberg kid, it's just a powerful combination. And like the Jetsons is just clever. The characters don't really work. Well, also a lot of those cartoons were sort of cribbing off of a sitcom or a show, and like Scooby-Doo, they were cribbing off Dobie Gillis,
right?
Which I haven't seen a whole lot of.
I watched a lot of Dobie. Sure, yeah,
but I think they improved it. While Jetsons, they were borrowing from Hazel, which was not a great show, and Jetsons. It just doesn't quite work.
Right.
The dad is an interest. I don't know why I'm going off on the Jetsons now, but the dad is an interesting. It just doesn't work. I don't know.
It's interesting that you bring up the Jetsons because it was while watching the Jetsons that I came up with my theory. Because the Jetsons and the Flintstones, they're both very rooted in the gender politics of the time.
Yes, that's right.
So they do kind of look dated. They do feel kind of dated to a certain degree. Women be shopping, right?
Well, yes, you're right. And also like, the boss that yells at you, which as a kid I'm like, boy, I'm dreading getting a job. Flintstone, get in here.
I got no blank yell at me.
Doesn't have that.
Or the wife that yells at you.
Yeah.
I mean, went both ways.
Yeah.
Wilma gave it to Fred too.
Yeah.
And I noticed that, like, Scooby-Doo, they're teenagers, so they don't have a lot of the domestic sort of entanglements and whatnot that you would have on a show like Flintstones or Jetsons, and they're all best friends, and they're all essentially equals in the game.
Yes, there's no hierarchy.
And I'm not even sure if it came in later, but definitely in that first 69 series that Ruby and Spears were writing, like, there's no male or female roles in that show. There's just personalities and friends that play off each other really well, and they all play, a certain aspect of that relationship that feeds how these characters like interact with their world and push the narrative forward.
There's no meanness either. They're so friendly that they don't yell at each other. There's no meaning. There's no boss yelling at them. There's no conflict amongst the group except for Velma lost her glasses, or
I just flashed back to Fred saying, "Velma, I don't want to get mad at you."
Right. Right. Exactly.
But yeah, I thought, I've always thought that that perfect balance of the archetypes and the mystery backdrop and whatever, I've always thought that was like integral to the sort of foundation of why it lasted. But I think the timelessness also has to do with what I said, because with the exception of maybe some of the fashion, but even the fashion, like you said, the retro, it never completely went away. I mean, even Fred still wears his ascot and people love it. Yeah, there's just a weird timelessness to the show that a lot of those other shows don't seem to have for some reason.
Yeah. They definitely had, again, Goober the Ghost Chasers. I mean, you put a different cast of characters together and try to solve mysteries, it just didn't work. I mean, as well, right? Captain Caveman came close because, again, there was a nonverbal character who's silly. But I think also, as a young kid, I remember giggling and laughing because when when Shaggy and Scooby get going, right? They're just going, oh yeah, they're laughing, whether they're high or not on Scooby snacks. But as a kid, you respond to that, and it hooks you in. And Shaggy was the funniest thing in the world when I was 5 years old. I mean, he was hilarious, So
yeah,
you wanted to be friends with him, and then you wanted to make out with Daphne or Fred. So yeah.
So one of the things that Casper and I talked about in our last conversation, which will now never see the light of day, was the fact that none of these things have ever seen any kind of official release, which has always boggled me. And Casper had said it's because it was never viewed as content, and ultimately, as a result, it's just like off everyone's radar. Much like you said, Larry, earlier in the conversation, that it wasn't viewed as content, so you were under the radar. It seems the perfect bonus feature for like a DVD, like you have a Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island, so you throw in whatever. Is that basically the reason? Is that cut and dried, or
no? I think obviously today things are way different regarding content, but back then, with no plan to make a longer piece out of this, there was probably no negotiations or renegotiations with the voice talent for a release, because that would have been a totally different contract. So we would have had to renegotiate that contract with probably Warner Brothers, and then because they were releasing the content back there on DVD, so it would have been completely a budgetary consideration.
And also, I wonder if being in Atlanta, if we were at Cartoon Network Studios and they were more aware of it, they might go, oh yeah, that thing that, if they knew us, that thing that they did, let's try to negotiate that and put it on there.
Well, as far as that goes, as far as making it happen now, I could certainly ask a few questions of people at Warner Brothers and at Cartoon, but I think again it's going to be, you have to go back to the original voice talent and renegotiate.
Because I think you're right, but I think that's a common thing now.
Yes.
Like on a Criterion edition, they'll get the rights to a Dick Cavett interview, they'll figure it out.
Right. I think that since it was produced by Cartoon Network and not Warner Brothers Animation Studios, there's a separation there.
Right.
Because Jay Bastian at Warner Animation, who's in the promo, he and I were just talking about this last week, randomly, independent of this podcast. He's
the deputy. Yeah.
He's the deputy. He responded to I took a picture of him as the deputy and sent it to him, and he was like, "My kids say that I'm in that thing, and they never see me." So I sent him the link to the promo. But I think if you ask the right people and the right timing for putting it on a format, then that could happen. Yeah, I'm sure.
Larry can make it happen.
Well, we should make it happen. We should make it happen, and I don't know who to call, but we'll figure out what we can do. No promises.
I don't know. I don't know if Scooby-Doo, sometimes older things will get a release that is also sort of aimed at the people who were kids at the time.
Yes.
And it'll have more content and more interviews with animators and stuff. I don't know if Scooby has gotten a release like that that's not just strictly for kids. Like, it's sort of like
a documentary?
Yeah, like a more, you know what I mean?
That's why I do this.
Yeah.
Yeah. The whole mission statement is there's very little added value content. The only new stuff that they've really produced is for the complete series for Where Are You that they released for the 50th anniversary. And that was there's a Frank Welker documentary, and I think there's another new documentary, but those are 5-10 minute pieces.
Yeah.
And
he's so great
for something that's lived this long. It's kind of like the redheaded stepchild of animation. It's so popular, yet nobody. I have people who come on the show and record commentaries for these episodes because I realize doing it on an official release, there's probably contractual things because the way that DVD works. I think after one of the big writer's strikes, when it came to new media, anything over 15 minutes is considered feature length and is paid under certain, which is why you get all your documentaries broken up into 15 parts.
That's right.
Oh.
Yeah. So getting someone to do a commentary or to come back and do a commentary is probably financially they don't want to do it. But yeah, I'm of the mind, I'm the person who I want to know more, right? I will always want to know more, and it's always been tragic to me that there's just so little.
The department did a in-house DVD. And I think we all did commentary, didn't we?
Yeah.
Do you still have one of those?
Yeah. So the on-air department produced 3 DVDs.
3?
Yeah, there's 3 volumes.
Oh wow.
Of all the work, a majority of the highlights of the work. Scooby-Doo Project is on there.
It is.
Yeah.
Did we do commentary?
I believe we did. But
can we give it to him?
People can't see Casper's expression, but
but yeah. So these were produced to attract writers. Actually, they went out with the writers' test to give people an example of what we did. And obviously the format was new, so it was we geeked out on making DVDs with commentary. But yeah, those were they haven't made it out there in the world. I haven't seen them on eBay or anything. But yeah, there's a few copies floating around this house, and they're out there. But I don't see why something like this, and not only this piece, but other cartoon interstitials from way back when can't just make it on to some sort of archive on the website or somewhere. Out there in the ether of Cartoon Network's official site,
This whole period, so many people, this was a focal point for their entry into animation and into some of these older animated properties, that Cartoon Network stuff, the Adult Swim stuff. It was formative, experiences with animation and these shows, and I think that's part of the reason why people are still watching Scooby-Doo Project, why they're still watching those Scooby-Doo Mystery Begins, where they're having those early interviews with the gang where they're explaining how Daphne's dad bankrolls everything and all that stuff. People are finding them and they're loving and watching these really bad VHS dubs that have been digitized because they just don't exist anywhere else. But it's kind of like how you remember some of those old commercial jingles or those bumpers the new Scooby-Doo movies will be returning after these messages. I have so many weird animated PSAs stuck in my head from when I was a kid that just...
we do too. I mean, obviously, the same ones, right? From all those ABC promos.
Yeah. So, considering, especially these days, it's such a contemporary thing to mine that nostalgia. The fact that they'll do an entire collection of a series and they put almost nothing on it. And there's so much stuff out there, and I've always assumed it was just rights and licensing.
Yeah, it's definitely
and just contracts.
It's definitely I'd say first and foremost the voice talent, because when you pay a talent obviously for a commercial or a bump, it's way different than paying for if that content goes onto a disc or official release, then you have to renegotiate.
Yeah.
Which it would be
could be done.
For this, it would be worth doing, obviously, because it's Scooby-Doo Project. But I just don't think we didn't make a lot of long form content back then, at this length. This was pretty long. The big game would be long if it was put together. And then what then happened was cartoon ad sales got more successful, and then less and less promo time and interstitial time was available to us. And that
I guess we were partly filling ad time that didn't sell.
Exactly the case. There was I don't know the actual numbers, but there was a lot of extra time on the air to make content, and that's why you had different branding campaigns back then. Screwy Ain't It was one that had a lot of long form interstitials. The Best Place for Cartoons. There was definitely some different contrasting brand messages. Whereas one network could just have one voice, we had different brand messages because we just needed to fill the time.
Well, thank you so much, guys, for coming on the show. Thank you, Casper, for rescheduling, and thank you, Larry, for joining the fun. This has been a really fun trip down memory lane and informative, very informative as well. I hope I asked kind of all the questions that are sort of out there. Is there an online presence? Is there somewhere you want people to find you? And what are you working on now that you might want people to know about?
I'm on Twitter at Hey Casper Kelly, and I'm on Instagram the same, but I don't really use that. And I'm writing a movie, but and I'm working on a Marvel animated show, but I can't talk about either of those yet. But those will hopefully come out next year.
And did you finish? You said last time we talked, you said you were working on season 4 of Your Pretty Face is Going to Hell?
Yes, that has aired.
Oh, it has? Okay.
Oh, and actually, Canada has you guys have don't you have Adult Swim now, or you have a network that plays it?
Yeah. I just started, after our first conversation, I started watching Your Pretty Face is Going to Hell. I was having fun with
it.
Good. Larry?
I don't have much of an online presence at all. I'm not a social media guy, but the official highest resolution version of the Scooby-Doo Project, I believe the short version, it might be the long version, is on my Vimeo page, and just uploaded the making of Scooby-Doo Project, which is about 5 minutes long, to the Vimeo page as well. So if you just search out Larry Morris on Vimeo, there's only 3 of us. I think I'm the only one with a screenshot of myself, which is crazy. But that's where you can find that stuff.
I'll definitely link to that in the show notes. I couldn't decide whether I wanted to cop to having seen it during the conversation, because I wasn't 100% sure kind of how you wanted to disseminate it. But yeah, there's a great, I think it's 7 minutes actually. It's behind the scenes. It's a little bit of commentary on the filming and some nice split screen scenes of the stuff that Casper, Larry, and it was Ashley, right?
That's right.
It was with you, yeah. That they had shot together, and the final product that aired on Cartoon Network. All right. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
And that concludes my conversation with 2 of the creators of the Scooby-Doo Project, Casper Kelly and Larry Morris. I hope you enjoyed listening to that. I certainly did, putting it together, as I always do. Casper and Larry were great fun to talk to. They were so giving of their time and their energy and their resources, which I mentioned in the last episode of the podcast, because not only do you guys get this great conversation, but through the efforts of Casper and Larry, you are also going to get not one, but 2 commentaries for the Scooby-Doo Project. It's going to apply to the 18-minute version, which I mentioned in the introduction. And one of them is going to be an in-house commentary that was made back in 1999. And the other one is going to be an outhouse commentary that was made in November of 2019. Casper and Larry put that one together and sent it to me. So I just have to cobble those things together and put them out. I'm probably going to release them separately so that you can kind of choose them individually rather than kind of lumping them together. I'm going to put those up as APNSD extra episodes. And I'm going to try and get those up quickly because, as I said in the intro, we're all trying to live our best pandemic life. There's a lot going on and a lot of people are at home. And who knows? Maybe you want to fire up a Blair Witch parody and watch it with 2 separate commentaries. Because 80 minutes of talking about this thing obviously cannot possibly be enough. There has to be 40 more minutes. Yeah, so that's it for me. I'm gonna just kind of do the where you can find everybody, where you can find the podcast, and clear out of here. So if you want to keep in touch with Casper, you can find him on Twitter at Hey Casper Kelly. And if you want to follow more of what Larry's doing, he unfortunately is not on social media, but he does have a Vimeo. The links to the Vimeo, the making of the Scooby-Doo Project, which was a 7-minute short little featurette that Larry had put together. That link's going to be in the show notes, as well as a link to the proper, best quality version of the Scooby-Doo Project, which Larry also put together. I've been posting those to the Facebook. I think they've been shared around a little bit, so you guys may have seen them. If you haven't, definitely go check them out. They are well worth the time. Just as a little tease, I've also been talking with Casper about possibly getting together to have a conversation about Night of the Living Do. Hoping to get to that, just a matter of arranging it, schedules. I think Casper's still interested in it, so with any luck, and hey, I mean, everybody's freaking at home, quarantined. I'm sure we'll be able to put this together in the next few months. I have confidence. So that's it for me. Find the podcast, all the places. Social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I'm either Scooby-Doo Cast or just search a podcast named Scooby-Doo. There's the Instagram page. There's the WordPress blog, scoobydoocast.wordpress.com, I believe. And yeah, like, share, follow, subscribe wherever you can. Support the show however you can. Thanks to everybody for listening and downloading these 2 episodes. I'll try to get those commentaries out as soon as I can, especially now that we've even just heard that Scoob is going to be delayed. So, gotta fill your guys' eyes and ears with something, right? Look for that coming up, and yeah, take care, stay safe. Like I said, keep your hands clean and don't touch your face. See you later, and we'll catch you on the next episode of a podcast named Scooby-Doo.
In the photo of Bones Malone, it showed Jasper looking at the photo of the prima donna. He obviously knew about the legend. I could tell you more, but I don't really wanna. Come on, Velma. You can do it. Entertain us in an informative way. Really? Okay. Clues are like equations. 1 + 2 is 3. Put them together, and you solve a mystery. Bye.
Have you heard anything about these woods being haunted?
Well, you know, my grandparents used to tell a story about some 10-foot tall, spikes on his arms, monster wandering in the woods. Just crazy talk, really.
It was right above us. It was big. It was puffy. It was globby or something. I don't know what you want to call it, but it was big. There was a glow to it. It was just right over the ridge there. The eyes would burn a hole in you, just glowing, burning, freakish eyes.
Aliens, bioengineering, genetic mutations. I don't know what's going on, but it troubles me.
I've heard about a ghost of a Civil War soldier that exists around here.
Giant radioactive cat over by the nuclear plant that kids say lives off of stray dogs, but I don't know. I don't believe that stuff.